What is LINQ? Hey everyone, Garth Schulte. Want to take a MicroNugget to talk about a little something in .NET known as the language integrated query, and how we can use it to save a lot of typing and keep our code bases in our .NET projects much more consistent. So the whole idea behind LINQ, it's really Microsoft's attempt to bring a little bit of sanity to how we work with collections of data. Whether that data is stored in memory inside of a collection of objects, whether it's stored in a relational database, or whether it's stored in XML files on the file system, currently, or I should say before LINQ, how we accessed all of this information from all these different data sources was different for each type. So for example, prior to LINQ, if we wanted to work with an object collection within our application, and we wanted to work with it in our own customized way, we would have needed to write our own enumerators, comparators, and there was a lot of work, a lot of plumbing, and a lot of time that went into coding that up. Same with relational databases. If we wanted to work with, say, SQL Server, we would have needed to get very familiar with ADO.NET, data sets and data tables to pull that information out and work with it. Again, a lot of code and plumbing involved. With with XML, prior to linked XML, it was even worse because you had to understand XML parsers, and it is not fun trying to parse XML because you have to do it node by node. You have to walk through the nodes within the XML hierarchy, and it just wasn't a very clean way of doing things. So the whole point is that prior to LINQ, we would need to spend a lot of time to learn each one of these technologies to work with their specific data structures. So Microsoft saw a need here to save us developers time and sanity by bringing querying into the .NET language, making it a part of the .NET language, so no matter where our data is coming from, we can write queries the same exact way. And that's why you'll see so many different flavors of LINQ out there, and more are growing every day. There's LINQ to Twitter, there's LINQ to Google, there's LINQ to Oracle, there's LINQ to MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQLite. I mean, you name it, there's a LINQ to everything these days. And that's the beauty of it, is no matter what you're working with, the syntax is going to be familiar because it's LINQ. And just to give you a couple of examples here, we have LINQ to objects, we have LINQ to SQL or LINQ to entities, and LINQ to XML. Now there's two different ways to use LINQ. One of them is using what's called method-based syntax, and one of them is using what's called query-based syntax. So the method-based syntax, you just do a dot right after your object name, and then you have your query operators, that's what these are called, this is just like writing a select statement against our object. So if you're familiar with the SQL language at all, then the query-based syntax will look very familiar to you. You have your from, your wheres, and your selects. The big difference is select comes at the end instead of the beginning, which is a little weird at first, but you get used to it and actually kind of starts to make sense. So let's run through each one of these blocks of code. The first one, using method-based syntax, because we're doing a dot select on our object, is a LINQ to objects here. So let's say that we just have a string array. We call it langs, and we initialize it by adding 4 values into it. So we have 4 values inside of this string array. And let's say we wanted to write a query to pull out anything that contained the string .NET. Pretty straightforward. We can just do a langs.select, and then inside of here we're using a lambda expression. A lambda expression, think of it as it's known as an inline delegate, but really what it does is think of anything on the left as our parameter, our placeholder, and anything on the right is our execution code. So for each value in our string array, it's going to get sent through this. The contains is going to be compared on that value, and if it has .NET in it, it's going to throw it into our .NET's dynamic variable here. Now let's take a look at LINQ to SQL. This could also be LINQ to entities and those are just object relational mappers. So the nice thing about this is we can work with our objects as our database entities as if they were objects, classes within our application. So we get IntelliSense support for it. So let's say that we had employees table. Inside of it, we had a languages column, and we had a bunch of employees in that table that described what skills they had using the languages column. Well, we could do the same thing, create a variable, and then we could start using LINQ here. We could say from e's just placeholder in our employees table where the languages column contains .NET and pull everything out of that and store it into this variable. Compare that with our LINQ to XML query below, and you'll see it's virtually the same. The syntax is the same, the structure is the same. The big difference is going to be how we interact with that specific implementation of LINQ, which in the XML's case is still a lot cleaner than it was in the past because we can reference elements very easily by name within our LINQ queries. And again, with LINQ to SQL and LINQ to entities, it's even easier working with relational data stores because those are object to relational database mappers, where it's basically going to take the tables stored in our database and turn them into classes that we can then work with right inside of the language, which is really, really cool stuff. So if you're a developer, .NET or otherwise, it's a great time to get into LINQ. It's the future as far as querying information within our application goes. You'll save a lot of time, sanity, and it's really nice opening up your code base and having other people look at your code base and saying, hey, this is nice. It's LINQ everywhere. It's a consistent way you're accessing your collections, you're accessing your database data, you're accessing all the data sources within your application using a consistent means. I hope this has been informative for you, and I thank you for viewing.